He's the 6th member of the team to be introduced in the 5th movie of the franchise, starring the 4th actor to play the character on the big screen in his 3rd Marvel movie, making this the 2nd Marvel character he has played. On this episode of Moving Panels, we discuss Captain America, the First Avenger. Welcome to Moving Panels, the podcast where we discuss movies and TV shows based on, inspired by, and adapted from the world of comic books. I'm your host, Laramy Wells, and joining me today in the co-host chair is the creator and host of the 80s Flick Flashback podcast. He could do this all day. It's Tim Williams.
I knew you were going to use that line, so I can't use that line now, but glad to be here.
Yeah. I mean, what other line would you use?
Yeah, I was trying to think of some today when I was rewatching it, and I was like, you just can't beat that one, you know?
I honestly thought, too, when I put it in there for your introduction, I was like, okay, I know Tim always likes to say a line. I was like, and I bet you this is the one he's going to want to say, but yeah. I'll beat him to it. So.
Yeah. And I kind of knew, I was like, they were going to beat me to it, so I should have something ready, but I didn't. So it's all good.
It's fine. We are talking about Captain America, the First Avenger, which is so funny because, again, he's not the first Avenger we're introduced to. Some people could even argue now that we know who Captain Marvel is, he's not even the first Avenger.
Right, exactly, yeah.
You know, by the time, saying that based off of when Nick Fury gets the idea of the Avengers.
True,
technically he would still be the first Avenger.
The first one from the 40s, yeah.
Talking about age-wise, and who came first, and it is what it is. All right, so let's jump into this. So, Captain America: The First Avenger was released July 22nd. You would think they could have gone a few weeks earlier and made this a 4th of July weekend, but nope. July 22nd of 2011 was this one that you saw. I know this is one I saw in theaters. I wanted to see every MCU movie in theaters. So, how about you?
Yeah, I saw this one in theaters, and this is one of the few movies a few Marvel movies that I actually saw in 3D, and I think it was only because that was the only showing we could get that day was a 3D showing, so I watched this one in 3D in the theaters, which was actually pretty good. I mean, every part isn't 3D, it's only really the action scenes that you really get the good effects, but it was still good. It was still good to watch.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I was all about the 3D at this point. I'm pretty sure if it was in 3D, I watched it in 3D.
Yeah.
Of course, this was also the time of when they were still doing the midnight openers.
Right.
And I don't know if I did that one for Captain America, but I did that for almost every movie that came out around this time.
Yeah. We did a lot of them too. I don't remember why because typically it was like a group of us that would go see it together, and we usually went like the first night it was open, either that Thursday night. Because I think even then they were doing it a little early. They weren't doing midnight. It was like
No, they started moving them up to like 10. Yeah.
So but I think like somebody couldn't go or some reason, so we did it on a Saturday or a Sunday. So we actually went to a matinee to see it. But I think it might have been, I don't know if it was sold out. We didn't get the tickets in time or what. But it was huge when it opened. I mean, it took up all the theaters.
I mean, all of these MCU movies right here, especially once they got. By this point, the momentum had gotten going.
Right.
And, of course, this was the movie that led into the Avengers.
Yeah, we knew that was coming next, so it was like this one you had to see.
But this movie was directed by Joe Johnston, who has the filmography as a director. So his very first film was Honey, I Shrunk the Kids.
Right.
And I just love that. The guy that directed Honey, I Shrunk the Kids directed Captain America. He also directed The Rocketeer, which seems
we both love.
Just perfect. Yeah.
Yep.
Very similar, in time period and being able to do that. He directed The Page Master. For those of you who are 90s kids, probably remember that.
Right.
And, of course, the iconic Jumanji.
Yes.
And then, for some reason, he followed this movie with The Wolfman.
Is that the one? Yeah, was that the one with Anthony Hopkins?
The one with Anthony Hopkins and Benicio del Toro.
Oh, yeah. He did Hidalgo. I liked Hidalgo. Wasn't a big movie.
Hidalgo, I think Hidalgo is one of those that I remember watching. I've only seen it once, but I remember when I watched it, it was enjoyable.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, it's not one that's really going to like stick with you or end up on like your favorites, but yeah, I truly enjoyed watching Hidalgo.
Yep.
So yeah, I recommend that one. Wolfman, though, I think I don't know if I've ever watched it from beginning to end because
I don't know if I've ever seen it all the way through either.
It's just not good.
Mm-hmm.
So he has a failure in there.
They can't all be hits.
No. But development for this actually started way back in 1997. So he actually could have been the first Avenger.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they started it in 1997. Of course, those of you who've followed the podcast, you know that it was around the 90s that Marvel was going through some issues and financial issues. And then in 2000, Marvel was actually sued by Joe Simon, who was one of the creators of Captain America. And he sued them over ownership of the character because Captain America was created for Timely Comics, which was eventually turned into Marvel Comics. But technically, it wasn't Marvel Comics when he created the character. So that was settled in 2003. Don't know how it was settled, but it was settled. And then it was about 2006 when Jon Favreau actually approached Marvel filmmakers and said, I want to direct. And then I guess someone went, how about you do Iron Man instead? And he said, okay. So he did Iron Man. According to an article that I read, the intent, according to Kevin Feige, the intent was to make Captain America a standalone film, but it would be part of a 10-movie deal that was funded by Merrill Lynch and distributed by Paramount. So I don't know if you noticed, there is a Paramount logo at the beginning because, yeah, this was actually released by Paramount.
Yeah, as most of the first Marvel movies were. They were under Paramount.
Yes. All of this started before the Disney acquisition. The Disney acquisition happened like right after the MCU got going because I believe that was 2009. So a lot of these movies were already underway. Contracts had already been settled. So, of course, you heard me say this was 2006 when this stuff's happening. Those of you, again, it's 2024 now to date this episode if you're listening to it much later. We just got out of a big writers and actors strike that happened back at the end of 2023. And it was in 2007 and 2008 that another big writer strike had happened, which did delay the making of this Captain America movie. But again, we got it in 2011, so it wasn't too bad of a delay. And of course, the MCU kicked off in 2008 with Iron Man. So we got all of that. I did also point out that this movie was written by writing duo Christopher Marcus and Stephen McFeely. If you're wondering what else they wrote, well, before they became part of the MCU, they wrote the Chronicles of Narnia movies.
Oh, okay.
Which, yeah, I was kind of, well, look at that.
I could see some correlation to that. Like that's just the old school style of storytelling is evident in both of those, I think.
Yeah, and then they would become part of the MCU. They would actually write all the other Captain America movies. They wrote Winter Soldier, they wrote Civil War, and then they even wrote Infinity War and Endgame.
Yes.
So
the magnum opus.
Yes, we of course have to also state that they also wrote Thor: The Dark World,
which we try not to mention when we mention the two of them, but because of that, let's just say because of that, they were able to somewhat redeem it by working it into Infinity War and Endgame to at least like, hey, even if you didn't like it, it was still important, and here's why. So like they kind of almost kind of in your face. You know you needed to watch it, but yeah, it's still tough to sit through.
No, you don't.
Definitely not in my top. Definitely not in my top list of favorite Marvel movies.
I don't think it's in many people's top list.
It's right there with Incredible Hulk. Moving on.
Okay, now I do like the.
I do like Incredible Hulk, but it's still not one of my favorites.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go ahead and jump into the characters. We'll go through the list, and then we can come back and hit some names and characters a little bit more, because there are a lot. So we'll first, of course, start off with Steve Rogers, Captain America himself, played by Chris Evans as his second Marvel character. Of course, many remembered him as the Human Torch, Johnny Storm in the Fantastic Four movies in the early 2000s. So I was kind of surprised to see him come as pretty much the, I guess you would say, poster child of of Marvel. I mean, Captain America and Spider-Man, probably the two most iconic characters.
Yeah.
Associated with Marvel. Then we've got the Red Skull, played by Hugo Weaving, because Hugo Weaving has to star in every major franchise.
Matrix, Lord of the Rings, Marvel.
Yeah. Just gotta do it all. And not his first comic book one either. He of course is V in V for Vendetta.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yep. Then we've got Peggy Carter, played by Haley Atwell. Bucky Barnes, who would later, of course, become the Winter Soldier, played by Sebastian Stan. We've got Chester Phillips, I have to mention, Tommy Lee Jones.
Yes.
Great character there. Howard Stark, played by Dominic Cooper. Arnim Zola, played by Toby Jones, the great Toby Jones. Dum Dum Dugan, one of my favorite characters. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. Played by Neil McDonough. Gabe Jones, played by Derek Luke. And then Abraham Erskine, played by Stanley Tucci, because you needed both commentators from the Hunger Games in this movie. So,
very true. Very true.
There you go. All right, so we'll go back and talk about some of these, but I'll go ahead and ask the question. So who of all these characters, and if there's one I missed that you want to bring in, that's fine. But who do you want to see again, and who do you wish would get frozen for 70 years?
I was thinking about this one. I was ready this time. It's nothing personal, but I just don't like his character. But I don't want to see Dr. Zola. Like, Toby Jones just seemed like, I know he's there because he has to come back later, but he just feels like he's just kind of shoehorned into every scene he's in. Like,
yeah,
I mean, there's certain plot points he needs to be there, but I think maybe they just didn't have enough for his character to really be developed. And Toby Jones is a great actor. It's not a knock on him. The character just always bothered me. Like, I just don't know why he's there. There's too many of who I want to see again. Of course, Haley Atwell, of course. Peggy Carter became its own TV show for a reason, because you want more Agent Carter. I'm kind of with you. Anything that Neil McDonough is in, I'm a fan of, because he's great. So I would have liked to have seen more of that company, like more of their missions that they did.
Howling Commandos.
The Howling Commandos, yeah, like that. I wanted to see more of them as a team, because I like Derek Luke, I like Kenneth Choi, like all the guys that were in that team are all actors that I recognize and know they do good work. So I would like to see more of them for sure.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I do want to point out, since you brought up, my mind just went blank on his name. What was the third guy that you brought up?
Kenneth Choi.
Yeah, Kenneth Choi. I do want to bring up, isn't it funny that he actually does return in the MCU?
He does.
Yes. And they went with it like, okay, you're now in Spider-Man as the principal.
Right.
But we've already used you in the MCU in the 1940s. So we're going to explain this by, you are his grandson.
Right. They put a picture of him from Captain America behind him on his desk. Yeah.
Yeah, but we're not going to just flat out say it. We're just going to let fans notice that there's a picture in the office. Right. I love that. I love that detail. Yeah,
that's one of the best Easter eggs for sure. Because by the time Spider-Man came out, you probably don't even remember he was in this movie, because once again his role is so small. It's not that big of it, but they're smart enough to say somebody's going to figure out this is the same guy. So we've got to put something in here to make sure they know he's not playing the same character.
They did a couple of those, because there's also in the Spider-Man movie, in one of the classrooms, you've got all the famous scientists on the wall, and one of them is Bruce Banner.
Okay.
Yeah, I like that little nod too. Again, they don't reference it. They don't say anything about it. It's just there. I do, just completely random, just to see your movie knowledge. Did you recognize Derek Luke that played Gabe Jones?
Yes, he's from Antoine Fisher.
Yeah, he's Antoine Fisher.
Yeah.
I asked because it was one of those, like, I'm sitting there watching it, and I remember last time, the first time I watched it, I actually thought he was, I don't remember the actor's name. I thought he was the dude from Save the Last Dance.
Oh,
with
yeah.
Julia Stiles.
Right,
I
yeah,
thought
yeah.
it was him, but I'm watching it this time and go, no, that's not that actor. I was like, but I still know this guy.
Right.
And so I had to look it up. It's like, oh, he's Antoine Fisher.
Mm-hmm.
That's awesome. Yeah, for me, again, I'm with you. I want to see more of the Howling Commandos. I would love to see more of the Howling Commandos. They debuted back in May of 1963. For those of you that don't know, they were actually Nick Fury's team during World War II. So, yeah, the comic was called Sergeant Fury and His Howling Commandos, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. And they do explain in the comics how Nick Fury goes from being a soldier of World War II to present day agent of S.H.I.E.L.D. They do explain that. But I think with the movies, they went, yeah, I don't think we can do that with the movie. So we're just gonna we'll just let it be Captain America with the Howling Commandos. But I definitely want to see more, because I will admit I guess you'd call it the war montage that they have, I actually think is the low point of this movie. Like it's cheesy, and I don't know. I don't like the little montage. That's all I want to see an actual like war movie. So that was kind of my thought. I'm not against Zola, but I guess it's because, me being the comic book guy, I find it funny. For those of you who don't know Armin Zola, so in the comics, he is a Nazi scientist, and he learns how to transfer his, or anyone's mind really, but he transfers his mind into a robot. And it is one of the craziest comic book characters you've ever seen, because it's this giant robot, but this little bitty head, and then this giant screen in the torso that is just a close-up of Zola's face, which, of course, they reference in Winter Soldier when they have him pop up on the computer screen. But they actually pay a nod to it in this movie, because the first time you're introduced to him, you just see his face through that magnifying glass.
Right.
I don't know if I had to pick someone who I want to see more of. To be honest, give me a Howling Commandos movie and give me more of Tommy Lee Jones.
Yes, absolutely.
I'd love to see it. Now, I will say that was not a made-up character. Chester Phillips is from the comics. Tales of Suspense number 63 in March of 1965, also a Stan Lee and Jack Kirby creation. He's quite different, though, because in the comic, he is actually in support of Steve being the super soldier.
Okay.
Of Steve being the one picked to be the super soldier. So, a little different there, but I love this take on the character. I love Tommy Lee Jones.
Absolutely.
Captain America, I don't know what we can really go in deep about. I mean, everybody knows who Captain America is. Debuted in Captain America Comics #1, famous cover of him punching Hitler. It came out in December of 1940, which is a fun fact, that the Captain America comic actually came out before America got involved in World War II. Joe Simon did originally call the character Super American, but decided to change it because at the time there were too many quote-unquote supers in the comics.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So he changed it to Captain America, which just seems so fitting, and why would you come up with any other name? Of course, that issue also introduced us to Red Skull, and he's still got the same name, Johann Schmidt, although I can't help but notice, so Johann Schmidt is just German for John Smith, which means Hugo Weaving is once again playing Smith, just like The Matrix.
Gotta love it.
Tell me something, Mr. Rogers. Peggy Carter, they fleshed that character out so much more than she is in the comics. In fact, she is connected to Captain America during World War II, but Captain America never knows her name, and she never knows that Captain America is Steve Rogers.
Okay.
By the time he's frozen. So, again, interesting. You could say it's the same character, but it's not. She's also American in the comics.
Okay.
She's not British. So this is taking the idea of a comic book character, but they made it into something so much bigger with Peggy Carter. And then they did the same thing with Bucky. because in the comics, Bucky is a child, more so a teenager, I guess you would say. He's the Army's mascot, is what he is referred to. The movie version more takes, as a lot of the MCU does, it takes the Ultimates universe that Mark Millar helped create.
Right.
And kind of mixes that, of course, with the Winter Soldier, because clearly they were going to set up for the Winter Soldier. Because the Winter Soldier does put them closer in age. But Bucky is a photographer for the military in the comics. He's not actually a soldier. And then it's in the Ultimates that they make the connection that they have been friends before the war. And that he was the protective, kind of big brother-like character for Steve. So
very cool. Yeah, that's interesting because even when I hear the name Bucky Barnes, I don't think of like a grown man going by the name Bucky. I mean, they kind of make it work where it's like that's their childhood friends is probably the nickname he had as a kid, but to know that was his his comic name Bucky and him being a full grown man, it makes more sense that he was like more of a child mascot in the comics than what they created him for the movie.
I do have a question, though, about putting Howard Stark in this, because Howard Stark has never been associated with the Captain America storyline. Of course, they had already done the Iron Man movies, and we already knew who Howard Stark was. But what were your thoughts? Like, do you think that was just a way to go ahead and start connecting things, or what were your thoughts about putting Howard Stark in this?
Yeah, it felt a little bit of a stretch for me. But I think it was for them a little bit of continuity, or Stark has been involved in every story up to this point, so I think that's probably why they wanted to work him into it, and then him developing the Shield and being part of Shield, the origination of Shield. I guess that's what that was. We found that out later, I think, more so than in this one, but yeah, It didn't bother me as much when I watched it then, but seeing the older version of Stark that we get in the other movies, I like that version of Howard Stark better than Dominic Cooper's version. And not that and once again, nothing taken away from him as an actor. I just didn't like that version of Howard Stark.
Yeah, I don't know about that version of Howard Stark. They of course would use him in the Agent Carter television show, and I think he'd pop up like one other time in the MCU.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Of course, Dominic Cooper would later go on to play Preacher on the AMC series. So he went a completely different route in the world of comic books.
Right.
One thing that I want to bring up that I didn't mention earlier, Dum Dum Dugan.
Yes.
So in the comic books, his name is, of course, he's a corporal. His name is Timothy Aloysius Cadwallader Dugan, but he goes by Dum Dum.
Dum Dum Dugan.
And I think it's just the alliteration. I love that's actually his name. I think it's great.
Put a lot of thought into that.
And again, I love Neil McDonough in it too. And they made him look like Dum Dum Dugan, but he was supposed to be a circus strongman. And he's supposed to be kind of strong. And I think the only indication we get of that is when he like shoulder tackles a guy at one point in the movie and launches him. I want to see more of the Howling Commandos. I just really do.
Yeah, we didn't get that Marvel series, did we?
No, I'd be very happy with that. Anything else that you want to talk about?
I probably should have mentioned it earlier, but talked about Chris Evans and him have already played some Marvel characters before and why he might have wanted to do this one. But he turned down the role like 4 or 5 times for the role of Steve Rogers. What I read didn't say it was because he had already been in a Marvel movie. He just knew how big the movies had become and like instant fame. He was going to, be a much bigger star because he had kind of mainly done more independent movies up until this point. I mean, I think Fantastic Four was the only like big movie he had been in before this. But Robert Downey Jr. is actually the one that convinced him to take the role. And then he met with Joe Johnston about playing Captain America. So I think it's interesting that he, even though that was probably who they wanted, and he was obviously the clear choice for the role, he was hesitant to take it.
And it's kind of funny. It's not like he disliked comic book movies. I mean, not only did he play Johnny Storm, but he was the voice of Casey Jones in TMNT.
Right.
And then he was in The Losers.
Yes, that's right. That was another comic book movie. Yeah,
and that was a year or two before this.
Yeah.
And then also a year or two before this, he was Lucas Lee in Scott Pilgrim.
That's right. Yeah.
All of those before he played Captain America.
Yep.
So yeah, and then he still didn't get away from comics because even while he was Captain America, he did Snowpiercer, which is based on a graphic novel.
Yep. Which is a great movie.
But I could see that a little bit. I mean, there's a lot of people who probably worry about what I know some people used to call the Superman curse.
Right.
Which is once you end up playing a very iconic character, you can never escape that character. And then you brought that story up. There's actually, this would have been after the fact, but there's actually a story about Amanda Seyfried turned down the role of Gamora because she was worried the movie would bomb.
Wow. I can't imagine her in that role, but that's still...
No. Yeah, Zoe Saldana made that her role, but
that's interesting.
Now playing on a cell phone near you. A show for all the manly men out there, where guys talk about their favorite movies and what they can teach us about being a man. Featuring the coolest guests.
Murder somebody is not like killing an ant.
The most gratifying laughs.
It's Tombstone, what can I say?
And a fresh take on movies like you've never heard before.
This will be the thing that gets written on his proverbial tombstone.
We aren't here to criticize the movies you love, but to praise them for how they apply to our lives as husbands, fathers, and really all men in general. So buckle up your seatbelts, because Manly Movies is here. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or your other favorite podcast catcher. And remember, man up.
All right, well, let's get into the moving panels. A few things to talk about here, because it's going to be hard to really pinpoint this, but I will say this is probably, and this might even still be the case, if you break down all of these, all of the Marvel MCU movies, this is probably one of the most faithful adaptations.
Okay.
Just from beginning to end.
See
there's
that.
of course changes to make it a movie, but let's start off with the Red Skull and Hydra. So in the comic books, the Red Skull, again, did debut in the very first Captain America comics back in 1940. But he's just a crazy dude who Hitler personally grooms, and Hitler gives him the Red Skull mask to wear. In fact, you'll like this. It was almost like a Trading Places kind of a setup. So Hitler is at a hotel, and he is berating one of his men, and says that he could make a better Nazi out of a bellhop. The bellhop at that hotel? Johann Schmidt.
John Smith.
Yeah, John Smith. So there you have it. And that is how he became the Red Skull.
Okay.
Red Skull was a part of the Nazis, but never Hydra in this aspect. There is some comics you can find where Red Skull works with Hydra, but he was never like he isn't the one who created Hydra.
Gotcha.
Which is what the movie
kind of sets up.
Yeah, I do think though. I think it's smart though to use Hydra so that way you really don't have to deal with Nazis.
Right.
So you do have the Nazi connection, but then as they do in the movie, you kill all of those Nazis and you just make it Hydra. And I think that I honestly think that was a smart move, because in the comics, the head of Hydra is actually Baron von Strucker.
Okay.
Who we won't be introduced to until I think Age of Ultron was the first time.
Yep.
Yeah. He's the one who makes Hydra the big bad organization in the comic books. Funny enough, he actually does it though in Japan.
Okay.
Not in Germany. and then also the whole connection with Bucky quote unquote dying and Cap being frozen. None of that is Red Skull in the comics. That's actually Baron Zemo.
Okay.
Who
we find later.
Would then also be introduced later in Civil War. But both Zemo and Strucker were World War II villains at the time. But there are a lot of connections. Red Skull did have an interest in advancing technology, especially any technology he could use to his advantage. That was a big connection, so that worked. The whole Red Skull thing, the him being an actual Red Skull, the only version of that I know of in the comics is there is a version in which Zola transfers, because again, I talked about how he has the ability to, he learns how to transfer minds. He transfers Schmidt's mind into a clone of Captain America. And then Schmidt disfigures the face because he doesn't like looking at Steve Rogers in the mirror.
Yeah.
So he disfigures the face, and that's what made the Red Skull look. Of course, what's very interesting is that in the Ultimates universe, the Red Skull is actually Steve's son.
Wow.
Yeah. We're not going to delve into that.
No.
But what I think is funny is the whole making him like the original subject of the super soldier serum that just went bad. That came from the 1990s movie. That did not come from the comics.
No, that's amazing.
That came from that bad 1990 Captain America movie.
Wow. Now that I would not have guessed. I would have thought that was from the comics.
No, and if it is, someone let me know. But because I've always stated I'm not as big a Marvel guy as I am a DC guy in terms of my history. So if someone can show me the comic that came out before this movie that says that Schmidt was the original subject of the super soldier serum, I'd love to know it. Let's see, what else do we got?
Maybe just a good nod to the 90 movie version. Just say, hey, here's a little wink to those that came before us that couldn't do it as good as we're doing it. Maybe.
Yeah. Maybe that's also the having Cap on the motorcycle is a reference to the Jeb Brown 70s Captain America.
Yeah.
Because he always drove around on a motorcycle. I don't know. But yeah. So let's see. What else did I? So Cap being in the USO. That's not really a comic book. It's kind of a comic book thing, but not really. So when he first becomes Captain America, the only reason he doesn't immediately go into battle is because the military finds him too valuable.
Right.
So they don't want to risk it. So instead, what happens is Steve goes kind of undercover, but on a U.S. base.
Okay.
And he just more serves as like a vigilante.
Okay.
Like he just sneaks out at night, dresses as Captain America, goes and fights crime. And that's actually the whole Bucky connection. Bucky ends up stumbling on him changing into Captain America and then actually blackmails him to being his sidekick. Let's see, I've already talked about the Howling Commandos. I will say this I didn't say this earlier. The Howling Commandos, this is kind of a hodgepodge group of the characters.
Okay,
like,
yeah, I figured as much.
This group isn't
the whole
Howling Commandos like you would see them in fact, a couple of them, the French guy, and I want to say, and I forgot his name again that you said earlier.
Kenneth Choi.
Yeah, I want to say the two of them were never officially Howling Commandos in the comics.
Okay.
They were just like, they would team up with the Howling Commandos. What do you think about the costume? Because that's always a thing with Captain America. Because, of course, the comic book Captain America costume is very iconic, but also could never be done in real life. Proof being the Captain America 1990 movie. So what did you think on their take of, and they do pay nod to it when he's in the USO.
Right.
He is wearing the classic costume. But what were your thoughts on their take of the different variations of the costume that he wears?
Yeah, it didn't bother me. I liked it. I mean, I didn't, not being as in depth with the comics, I'm not going to notice that it's that much different. But I think they did good of like keeping it close to the time period of making it look, vintage. His costumes as we get into Avengers and in present time gets a little bit more cartoony. But I thought it worked.
Yeah, but they still always, they do avoid the giant cuffs on the gloves and the boots.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate. Yeah, I did like, though, more of his like battle suit in this movie,
Yeah.
where he's actually wearing the kind of military garb, but he has the Captain America. Of course, at the same time, I'm watching that going, where did he get that suit? Like, they explain where he gets the shield.
Right.
Are we just supposed to assume Howard maybe is making him a suit?
He does.
Somebody's
He
making
does.
him a suit?
He does make a comment to Stark at one point. He's like, "I have some thoughts on the suit, or some changes to the suit." So that makes me think that Stark has been the one that's been designing it from the beginning.
Yeah, I think, though, that I would have to go back and watch again to see like where the time, because the suit changes throughout the movie.
Oh yeah. This is right. This is
so
closer
it'd
to
be
the end when they're about
so
to do
it'd
the
be more
big
of
battle.
finding out where exactly all that happens. And of course, you mentioned the shield earlier, the iconic circular shield. I do want to point out the shield that he has that kind of more looks like a crest.
Right.
That, of course, is the shield that Captain America has in the first issue. But it is actually in the very second issue of Captain America comics that the circular shield is introduced.
Okay.
So he didn't have that other one
Very long.
for too long. Yeah. The only other thing to bring up, and I actually brought this up back when we did our Avengers episode a couple years ago, and that is the Cosmic Cube,
Yes.
which was, of course, in the movie it's called the Tesseract, but it is supposed to be from the comics, the Cosmic Cube. And in the comics, the Cosmic Cube is not an Infinity Stone. Of course, at the time, we didn't know this one was an Infinity Stone either.
Right.
But the Cosmic Cube was its own thing. In fact, there's several different Cosmic Cubes. Let me come back to it being an Infinity Stone, though. We, of course, later find out that the inside the Tesseract is the Space Stone.
Right.
So if it is the Space Stone, and we now know what the Space Stone can do, I mean, go back to Endgame. Loki gets the Space Stone, and that's how he teleports out. Does that mean that all the people Schmidt was, quote-unquote, killing with it weren't actually being killed? They were just being transported somewhere?
Sounds possible to me.
Which also would make you think the same thing happens to Red Skull
Right,
at the end.
yeah,
which
exactly.
then ties it back to Endgame.
Right.
Is that he's not actually killed. He's just transported.
Yep.
Yeah, I just thought it was interesting. But back to the Cosmic Cube. So in the comics, like I said, there are several. Just not to break down each one, but essentially they are wish makers. I hate to say this, but they're pretty much like the MacGuffin that was Wonder Woman 1984.
I was just about to ask that question. I was like, so it sounds like the same thing was in Wonder Woman 84. Yeah. When you said a wish
that's
maker,
what
I
it
was
is.
like, yeah, that sounds like that. Okay.
Wishmaker alters reality to whoever, for whoever makes the wish for whatever to be true. But
Who said
the first Cosmic?
Who said plagiarism wasn't real?
Look, we could do a whole episode on the number of times Marvel and DC have plagiarized each other.
Right? Exactly.
Yeah, or even sometimes when the artist plagiarizes themselves when they switch from.
Right from.
Like I said, that would be a whole other episode.
Exactly. I hear a one shot.
But yeah,
coming.
the first Cosmic Cube was seen in Tales of Suspense number 79 in April of 1966, so it's been around for a while. The Red Skull, however, did not possess a Cosmic Cube until Super Villain Team Up number 16. I did not know that was a comic until I did this research. Okay. There was a comic called Super Villain Team Up. And he teams up with the Hate Monger in that issue. That was in February of 1979. His possession of a Cosmic Cube doesn't last long, though. The Cosmic Cube is destroyed. So, what is it? It's the MacGuffin of the movie. Of
course.
Let's just make it, it's what moves the plot along. Doesn't really serve any other purpose until the Avengers the next year, when it actually becomes a key part of it. All right, but let's unless you've got anything to talk about, let's go ahead and get in the final decision.
Let's go.
All right, bag it, stack it, or trade it. I will let you go ahead. And Tim, what say you?
I got to bag it. This is one of my favorite Marvel movies. I still edge Winter Soldier over this one just a little bit. I just think the action sequences are better. Russo brothers are fantastic with their action sequences. And I would say what kind of dings this movie a little bit for me is, especially watching it again today, some of the effects and the action sequences look a little bit aren't done as well or aren't as clean as I thought they would have been. But overall, it's still a great story. It's a great origin story. Yes, I'm bagging this one for sure.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I mean, it's Captain America.
Yeah. Right.
I mean, like I said, he's one of the most recognizable comic book characters in history. He's Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, as I talked about. You don't have to know comics to recognize this character.
Right.
Because honestly, at the time, really, other than the Hulk, none of the other who would become the Avengers were known by just the average Joe.
Right. Yeah.
Honestly, until Robert Downey Jr. played Iron Man, no one knew who Iron Man was, unless you were a comic book fan.
Right.
No one knew who Iron Man was. No one knew who Thor really was.
Unless you saw Adventures in Babysitting in 1987.
Yeah, you kind of had an idea there you go, your 80s reference.
Got to get my plug in somehow.
Or the return of the Incredible Hulk television movie where he appears. But then, of course, Natasha, Black Widow, Hawkeye. You know, I would even say Nick Fury. I mean, none of them, unless you're a comic book fan, you didn't know who any of those were. Hulk, you only do because of the successful television show in the 70s.
Absolutely.
Yeah, but Captain America, everybody knows Captain America. So, yeah, how do you not bag it? And like I said, it's a pretty faithful adaptation. I have no problem with them mixing things and compressing things because you have to do that with a movie, especially when you're talking about a comic that has existed since the 40s. You know, you got to condense some of that stuff, and I think they did it well without ruining the comic. Yeah. I will play off of something you said about the effects. Again, we are talking about a movie that came out in 2011, so you know we've advanced a little bit in technology since. But at the same time, part of me thinks that was intentional.
Okay.
Like part of me thinks there was a lot of this movie that was almost made to look either at some points give it that grainy look, so it actually looked like World War II, 1940s. For sure. Yeah. And then I also think that they were truly, and they didn't go the route of Ang Lee with Hulk, but they were trying to make a comic book movie.
Oh yeah, for sure.
You know, that montage I talked about earlier. I mean, there's the famous shot of him throwing the shield and, you know, of course they made the movie in 3D and all that, but it literally looking like it's coming off the screen, like it's, you know, going from one panel to another. Part of me would say that was probably intentional. But that would still put it as a baggage for me because they were able to make a great movie and keep it so true to the comics in both look and feel and story, and absolutely love all of that. So I totally agree. This is a Baggett. He is the first Avenger. He is one of the first comic book characters. I mean, Superman only debuted 2 years before him, so he is one of the grandfathers of comics, both I guess you'd say literally and figuratively.
Right.
So, all right. So Tim, any last words? Anything you got to say? Anything coming up on the 80s flick flashback?
Well, before I get to that, I agree with you. It's a great movie. It's one of my favorites. Obviously, one of my favorite Marvel characters. So it's definitely enjoyed watching it again. You know, some of the Marvel stuff lately, you know, it's on a discussion for another time, but you know, there's a lot of talk about, you know, Marvel fatigue and, you know, the new movies not being as good, but this one got me excited again. Like going back and watching this one makes me remember why I love the Marvel series. Like this one was so well done.
Felt that too.
Yeah. So coming up on the 86 Flashback podcast, so the Friday of this week that this drops, I will drop my 100th episode, which is going to be a lot of fun.
Congratulations.
Thank you. I know you're not too far behind me. Well, I guess you...
mine will come in summer.
Yeah. So excited about that. And then I've got a lot of good movies coming up this year. I decided that I was going to do a lot of my favorite movies for this season. Movies that I've wanted to do, but I've kind of put on the back burner. So we're going to cover some maybe not as well known or not the big blockbusters like we kind of did last year. But I'm looking forward to hitting some favorites of mine like Footloose, which I was a blockbuster. Or do The Color Purple in the after our 100th episode. because the musical just came out, but that's also a favorite of mine. So I'm trying to think now what else I have coming up, but we've got some good stuff coming up. So I'm excited. 8th season, 100th episode. We're just having. I feel like I'm kind of hitting the groove of the podcast and feeling really comfortable about where we are. So that makes me happy.
And as always, such a great listen, especially those of you who are of the age that you are very nostalgic of 80s movies.
Yeah.
Like Tim and I both are.
Yeah, and go back and listen to Spies Like Us, which we just did earlier in January. We kicked off the season with Spies Like Us, which is a fun Chevy Chase and Dan Aykroyd comedy movie.
Hilarious movie.
Doctor.
Can't not say it.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thanks everybody for listening. We're going to continue things on. Of course, month of February, Bethany and I will do our Valentine date night episode. And then March Madness is just the very next month, where we are going to go into Watchmen, which, Alan Moore, I love you, man, but I am ready to be done studying your stuff. So we'll get into that. Tim will join me to actually talk about the HBO limited series of Watchmen, the reimagining / sequel series. Tim will be with me during March Madness to talk about that. But we'll go ahead and wrap things up for today. For Moving Panels, I'm Laramy Wells, and I'll see you on the other side of the page.